Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 3rd of June 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment, pause the video and look at the key. Right, let's go to the front line. We can see that yet again there is no change to the northern areas around Sumy and Kharkiv. There are some changes to that northeastern front line and again on the eastern front lines, as we would imagine, and also around Robotyne and further to the east. Actually, some new places opened up there, but we'll start with Kharkiv Oblast, and there's been a lot of activity going on behind the border in Shebekino and other sort of places around Belgorod, with HIMARS being exceptionally active there. We'll just go to what the ISW says of the area. This is one of the few times we'll pop into the ISW today. One Russian mill blogger criticized Russian forces for continuing to operate vehicles in long columns despite repeated instances of Ukrainian strikes against Russian columns throughout the war. An open source Twitter account noted that unspecified Ukrainian sources stated that the column consists of 18 Russian vehicles. That's that column we talked about that dispersed and got hit repeatedly by FPV drones. Russian officials and mill bloggers claimed on June the 2nd that Ukrainian forces conducted an MLRS strike on Shebekino, as I've just pointed out, Belgorod Oblast, which killed the deputy head of Korochansky Rayon, Igor Nechiporenko, and injured several Rayon and settlement heads. I talked about that this morning in the Hits and Losses video. Another open source Twitter account citing photos and imagery stated that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian supply base in the industrial district of Shebekino. It's worth noting, I talked to you earlier today about an S-400 system being struck. Well, now we have this. So S-300 destroyed, S-300, 400, they use similar sorts of components near Kiselevo and Belgorod, Russia. Satellite imagery from June the 2nd shows an S-300 deployed at the location. So it could well have been here, not 100%, but it appears that this is a prominent culprit for the strike, and that is, as you would initially imagine, I said possibly around where the was it the marketplace around, it might have even been in Shebekino, where there was talk about it, a S-300 400 being targeted there. But no, it does seem that it was up north of Belgorod, which is where we're under the impression that there's one possibly around the airbase on the very northern outskirts, or the airport, very northern outskirts of Belgorod city, and that would be because it conveys protection to the system, with the city just to the south of it. But actually this is further to the north now, up around Shopino. So Shopino is where there have been well, it's actually further northeast from there, but Shopino as well is where there have been some strikes with HIMARS. So this whole area is getting quite a bit of attention from the Ukrainians. That column in the Kursk Oblast, not entirely sure where that is. I could go and geolocate it, find it, but it's going to be somewhere around there. But yeah, no changes to this front line. We'll just finish what ISW says. Ukrainian forces continue to strengthen their defences in Sumy Oblast against the threat of possible future Russian offensive operations. The operational command spokesperson said on June the 2nd that Ukrainian forces are strengthening and improving their defensive lines, including the 2nd and 3rd lines in Sumy Oblast. It's also stated that Ukrainian forces are identifying threatened directions and are taking the local terrain into account when constructing fortifications. They're saying that because that wasn't what had happened previously in Kharkiv Oblast, supposedly. A Russian mill blogger claimed that the Russian military command is transferring an unspecified number of forces to Kursk Oblast. So it could be that the Russians are getting ready to attack, but the Ukrainians are not only well dug in there, but I'm sure they're going to be hitting those staging points where the Russian forces are. Russian forces are recently marginally advanced southwest of Vovchansk and northwest of Kharkiv city amid continued fighting north and northeast of Kharkiv. Geolocated footage published on the 2nd indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced in the fields north and east of Staritsya. Okay, we'll go and look at that. So here we have the geolocation. Today, Russians, is the claim from Special Kherson Cat, began a new attack on the Kharkiv front in the direction of Staritsia, west from Vovchansk. According to reports, the attack involved mainly infantry and old tanks like T-62. So I reported this the other day. 42nd Brigade of Ukraine took part in repelling the attack. Quote, this morning, Russians launched a massive assault on our positions in the area of the village of Staritsia. Hundreds of tons of equipment and a large number of personnel were destroyed in the coordinated actions of all the units of the 42nd Brigade. The battle is still ongoing at the moment. We have confirmation that infantry, there were about 20 dead, 21 injured, 3 T-62s destroyed, 1 damaged, an infantry fighting vehicle destroyed, and a destroyed self-propelled gun and 2 destroyed vehicles. So that looked fairly painful for the Russians there. The geolocation here for one of the T-62s to give you an indication of where this took place. And remember, the Institute for the Study of War saying this shows marginal gains. But again, we get back to that old issue of, does an attack that gets completely repelled constitute ground that is controlled? Nevertheless, it is exactly kind of where you would expect an attack to be, just in front of Russian lines. Deep State map has that within Russian control. Surat maps has that well behind their control. But of course, a repelled attack there, I think, would probably more likely indicate that Andrew Petra's mapping is correct in that particular area. They could have been hit before they crossed robust control lines, of course. But it's whatever, whether it's 500 meters here or there. I think it just more probably tells us that Surat Maps is not correct in their analysis of the positions. And then you have Vovchansk to the east. Supposedly, ISW says some gains within Vovchansk, but I'm not sure. That doesn't seem to be particularly confirmed in other sources. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces are unsuccessfully counterattacking in northern and central Vovchansk and in the forest areas between Hliobeke and Lyukantsi. So that is to say that the Ukrainians are counterattacking both somewhere around here and also in Vovchansk, but the Russians claiming unsuccessfully, as they would, of course. So that's pretty much what we have to say about that neck of the woods. We come on to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. Nothing in the usual places, actually sort of halfway down. Stelmakivka is fairly active these days, and those kind of areas. Interestingly, a bit of a change, as according to Surat maps, in an area just to the east of Sinkivka. This is an area that there was a bit of a change the other day and no real talk about it, and then it appears there's a bit of a change back. I can't speak to what's going on there. We'll come on down to the Sversk front, where you can see there's no change from Bilhorivka. Some people still sort of talking about this general area. There's quite a lot going on there, but no change today. And then we get to Chaziv Yar, where the Russians are trying to make that attack through Kalinivka across the channel, across the canal to the other side. This is where they attacked yesterday, apparently. Well, differing claims. There's all this fortification around here. The Russians claim they drove through. Some people were claiming Julian Rutka, saying that there were no Ukrainians to put up a fight. Actually, they were there. There are some claims that the Russians just drove through them and then were isolated because they'd basically not attacked the Ukrainians in the position, but just got behind them and then were taken out there. But I'm not really sure how accurate that is. There is fighting around here. There are trenches and fortifications in this area to the east of the canal here that the Ukrainians are in, and sort of right on this area. So expect fairly fierce fighting to take place. It appears that Surat Maps is quite confident the Ukrainians have been pushed right back through Kalinivka, and the Russians have on subsequent days taken robust control over this settlement quite easily. I don't know how accurate that will be, considering the other two mappers are not in agreement there. Surat Maps says of this particular area that the situation around Kalinivka became clearer. Russian troops managed to settle in some trenches along the canal. The locality is mostly under the control of the Russian army, except for the northern part of the hill and the warehouses. So fairly confident that the Russians have done a good job of taking that area. and it's this area up here, which, if you can see on the bottom right of the screen, you have the height of these places. That's 225 meters, going down to around 200 meters down here. So that's a 25 meter difference. And this is a hill they're kind of talking about that the Ukrainians still control. But no change to the rest of that area, the Canal Micro-District in Chasiv Yar, and down south in the kind of Ivaniska Way, or the T0504 road that comes through there. So good news to the Ukrainians in that respect. No change around Klishchivka. Come further south past Toretsk in New York, and on to the northern part of the Avdiivka sector with Ocheritina, showing no change. In fact, relatively small amounts of change, very small amounts of change for this whole area over the last 24 hours, with just seeing with a slight gain according to Deep State Maps and Surrey Maps just west of Netalove, next to that the Karlivka reservoir there. But nothing too much, and in fact no changes to Krasnohorivka, Mariinka and Novomykhailivka. All we have from Andrew Perpetua is another kind of rage about what the Russians do here. So where are we talking about? Well, this is actually, we were talking about the gains they did have just by Netalove, by the Karlivka reservoir. The Russians have struck further back from there at a settlement back here, Mikhailivka, there. So that's where we're talking about, and he's just sort of raging, and rightly so, that today in a small village in Mikhailivka, Russia first launched an airstrike. They dropped a UMPB D-30SM bomb on the town. This is a long-range glide bomb. The bomb landed in a residential area and killed an 84-year-old woman. Then an hour and 20 minutes later, they fired Smerch into the town. So those multiple launch rockets. These rockets killed a 12-year-old boy and wounded his 43-year-old father. I mean, yeah, that's what the Russians are doing, because that is what liberation looks like, and that's where I just get all angry with the whole basis of this war. It's just bloody senseless and stupid Russian idiocy from up on high. Anyway, you all know that. Well, most of you do know that. Some of you deny it. Right, moving on to the southern front line. We've got no claims about Velika Novosilka or Vuhledar over there, but quite a few claims about what's going on around the Robotina sector, but actually further to the east. So we saw some activity around Myrna the other day, and it seems there's some further activity going on today, with Andrew Perpetua claiming some Ukrainian gains to the north of that over quite a large distance there, and then Surrey Maps showing fairly deep counterattacks from the Ukrainian south of Myrna, which is interesting. Both mappers saying different areas are being attacked here. We have Global War Monitor saying Ukraine has liberated a small area north of the contested settlement of Luhivska. The Russia's 165th Artillery Brigade has shelled their positions. This could be, well, that's exactly what we're talking about there. This could be one of those situations where, it turns out Ukraine have been there. Now we've got evidence from shelling from one side showing, okay, the other side do control that, rather than an actual counterattack that took place, say, for example, yesterday. I'm not 100% sure. Further further discussion about that area from Surrey Maps here. And as you can see, quite a large area that Surrey Maps has, the Ukrainians taking control of. So modifications exactly. So not necessarily an attack. A modification was made to the Myrna-Luhivska axis. Much of this territory, thought to be under Russian control, eventually fell under Ukrainian control. In addition, Ukrainian army made small advances north of Bahate on the map. So there were some advances, and then also modifications. Either way, that's Ukraine controlling more of the ground there than previously thought. Not sure what Andrew Perpetua what underwrote his changes to the north of Myrna, and then adding a little bit for the Russians just below the settlement. But good to see blue on the map, that's for sure. And then we come a little bit to the west. We come to Robotina. We're going to talk about Robotina with the next source. So some small gains for the Russians, just moving east of the town in an easterly direction, across some of the you can see there's a trench network which is slightly more I suppose fortified than just little dugouts in the tree lines and whatnot. That one's marked on the map. It could be that they've taken control of that. No other mappers agree though with where Surat map has the very charitable control zone for the Russians. It's not to say they don't have that. My understanding is that Robotyne is so flat that no one really controls it. It's just a grey zone of rubbleized buildings that is very difficult to maintain control over. Andrew Perpetuous says, when your propaganda backfires, what's he really talking about? Well, actually, I think this is in the Robotyne area, trying to make sense of this. I think these are basically Russian. This is Romanov, who is a prominent Russian mill blogger, talking about how Russians control Robotyne and so on. And then other Russians then saying, "Oh, guys, at what cost did they fight him back? Mob potential is crap. Why waste time on a pile of bricks?" You understand Robotyne is just another ruin. There are no shelters and there won't be any. Robotyne will be held by more suicide bombers, but who cares? It's much easier to make a victorious post. In other words, they like to make these big claims about these places that sound victorious, make a post on social media, but the reality is that if they do try and take these places, that it's not worth the expense in terms of human life, or they don't control it. This news has been circulating from one channel to another for more than a month. It is clear that someone was in a hurry and someone was waiting for the last enemy soldier to be evicted from evicted from the scare quotes populated area and from the grey zone. Perhaps also repeatedly the destruction of warehouses, inland storage facilities, equipment, etc. is reported. In other words, I mean, it doesn't tell you an awful lot of detail trying to work out what it really means. But my take on that is Andrew Perpetua pointing out that there are claims about Robotyne, and even the Russians are going, yeah, no, and it's casting some skepticism on the claims. And indeed, that would be supported by the mapping differences here, where for some time now, Surat maps just went along with what the Russian MOD said, and that the Russians control all of Robotyne. And if you remember a couple of weeks back, the Ukrainian commander came out and said, no, it's a load of BS, like very pointedly, and the Russians don't control this. And here we are, with still the mapping claims from Surat maps that are unlikely to change. Not in a hurry anyway. Surat maps not too quick to correct over estimations. But there you go. That's the southern front line, and no change to Krinky or Dnipro, although we do have some claims in the Institute for the Study of War. That's the only other thing that I thought worthy of discussion, which is Russian forces recently marginally advanced on the east left bank of Kherson amid continued positional engagements in the area on June the 2nd. I'm trying to work out, because some claims are that the Ukrainians are really broadly pulled out of Krinky and Dnipro River area, across the river, well, actually all the way up to Kharkiv. So some of the units doing well around here have been brought into Kharkiv to defend there. The question is, are there still Ukrainians at all on the left bank of the Dnipro? And I can't say for sure. The evidence that's suggested in terms of positional engagements and fighting here doesn't prove one way or the other that the Ukrainians are there. So it talks about geolocated footage published on the 2nd indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced in northern Krinky, and by that it's Russians being in places that get hit by drone units, by FPV drones. So this talks about FPV drones hitting Russians in shelters. That doesn't, of course, mean that the Ukrainians are that side of the river. It just means that the Russians may be advancing into what is effectively empty ground now. So in this sort of area, this has always been grey zone rather than Ukrainian control. It's not like you cross a line there and it suddenly becomes Ukrainian control. Ukrainians control the island areas and this river delta area, but here the Russians might well be moving through the rubble and then getting hit by Ukrainian drones, and then that being clocked by geolocators, and you will see them coming through this whole Krinky area, possibly taking the whole lot back because the Ukrainians really aren't there, but they will make the Russians bleed for every meter that they advance in terms of striking them with FPVs and, one might think, artillery and mortars. So that is the situation in Krinky. I mean, there are a few more. Let's see. Let's just pump another coordinate into the map and see where that comes up. And the answer is absolutely nowhere, because for some reason that's how it rolls. We'll do that again then. Yeah, so pretty much in the middle of Crinky, or to the northeast of Crinky, really. That is pretty much that for the Frontline update for the 3rd of June. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. And the final thing I will say is I've been talking about how I am quite bullish about Ukraine's position at the moment, that you can do the micro versus the macro. And I was speaking on the shills to Greg Terry about this the other night, saying, look, I'm in a really positive frame of mind because I think Ukraine are in a good position going forward. They are on their knees at the moment. They are suffering. They don't have enough troops. They are, getting battered a lot, but they are making the Russians pay for it massively. The Russians are very low on, I think, equipment. I think they're low on troops, actually. I think compared to what really Scarecrow should be. I think they're bringing in, by all accounts, trainees or soldiers that are just fresh out of training, or hooked out of training without finishing, to the Kharkiv region as reinforcements, as well as bringing Russians from elsewhere on the front line, which means they do not have the depth of defensives and reserves, which means that you're unlikely to see a major Russian offensive in the summer, and you're left thinking, oh, where are they? Well, meanwhile, the Ukrainians are getting HIMARS are plenty. They're using ATACMS freely, although not up in Belgorod, but I don't think they particularly need them right now. I mean, it'd be great if they could have them, but they're doing enough damage with the HIMARS, regular missiles and other multiple launch rockets systems that are taking out S-300, 400 and accumulations and bases and supply depots, etc., etc. They've got F-16s on the way. They've got artillery ammunition starting to gather momentum with their deliveries, etc., etc. I think it is basically, they need to get boots on the ground. They are improving their mobilization, but that's still going to remain their major challenge, as it will be for the Russians. But you can be forgiven for thinking it's all terrible for the Ukrainians if you go and speak to the Ukrainian troops on the ground that are fighting on a daily basis, and if you're not having the same conversations to the Russians, right? So all of that is true. Both things can be true, that the Russians are causing the Ukrainians a hell of a lot of woe up and down the front line, but that's also true the other way, that the Ukrainians are hammering the Russians. And we've seen testament today. I've shared a bunch with you in terms of the Russian losses that are phenomenal. In some places they only have 3% of the troops that they sent in. 12 troops out of 300 or something was one claim, or 9 troops out of 300. Then there was 12 out of 100, and then another person saying 10%. We've only got 10% left. So all these anecdotes from different places lead us to this quite positive conclusion that the Russians are getting absolutely tonked. In terms of personnel and equipment. And then, so I just want to answer this, Jason Grace. I mean, I don't know where this guy comes from really, but I'm sure the Ukrainians do not believe the Russians have it easy. I've never said either way. How can anyone claim that the Russians have it much worse? I can claim that. I think the Russians do have it worse, but they have the capacity to. I mean, the whole point of this is that the Russians massively outnumber the Ukrainians. So the Russians have it worse, but they've got a greater capacity to soak up that pressure and to soak up those losses. The question is, are the net losses from each side better for one side than the other? As they both start in whatever places and they're getting attrited like this, what you want from a Ukrainian point of view is that it goes like this, so that actually the Russians are losing more troops and equipment at a much greater rate. And I think that has been happening, and where Ukraine are fighting existentially for their entire future. So you'll get people hopefully volunteering more for that, but also if they're force mobilized, they can understand why they're being force mobilized. The difference with the Russians, they may have more people to draw from, but they're going to get more pissed off if they're getting force mobilized to something they don't truly believe in, because it's not existential. This is like a frivolous decision by Putin to go and attack another country. So this guy completely misunderstands me. So Zhenya and Pete, the two people on the front line, one helping and one being a medic, literally on the contact line, are well aware of each side's hardships. And for you to dismiss their first-hand experience, I never dismiss. I said it's entirely 100% correct. But what we need to do is then work out what's going on the other side, and then zoom out and see what's going on with the production of weapons and assistance, military, financial and economic and political from other countries, and where this leaves Ukraine and Russia in terms of a prognosis going forward. So just please don't misinterpret me and then straw man me. So Zhenya and Peter are well aware of each side's hardships, and for you to dismiss their first-hand experience, is arrogant. I'm not being arrogant. Being outgunned and outnumbered in a war is psychologically demoralising, not to mention never truly knowing if enough aid or manpower will ever reach them to continue the fight. Listening to you, we should all believe the Russians are going to collapse soon, and that simply isn't true. Well, I think they are under pressure of collapsing, Jason Grace. Whether it's soon, I don't know. I doubt it is soon, as in the next few weeks, but I don't think the Russians can continue to take these losses without something going amiss, I think, back at home. I don't think there'll necessarily be a military collapse, and I keep saying this, I've been very clear about this. I don't think either side is going to make a military breakthrough that will win them the war. It's just not how these things work. What you'll get is an economic and political collapse that will precipitate a withdrawal that will be opportunistically taken advantage of, and then you can move through, especially if you're hammering the other side with distance munitions, which is why I think it's so important the Ukrainians are able to use loads of missiles and drones to absolutely hammer the Russians. However, the Russians have the ability to take out Ukraine's energy grid. Now, that is their strong point, and that's Ukraine's massive challenge, as well as obviously both sides having mobilization issues. But they affect each side differently. As I've said, the Russians have many more people, but you start trying to force mobilize 300,000 people from Russia, or 500,000 people, the economy goes tits up, you are absolutely done, and then you'll have massive problems domestically. You force mobilize 500,000 in Ukraine, that's exactly the same, but the society will understand why you're doing that. And while that might be uncomfortable, and while you might get a lot of people draft evading and leaving the country, a lot of the nation will understand, yeah, of course we have to do that because we're at war. Whereas Russia doesn't have to do that. So that's a really fundamental difference. And so at the same time, there are 50 nations that will be economically supporting Ukraine if that came to pass. And so the prognosis for both sides is looking rosier for Ukraine. Very difficult, right? It's not rosy, it's rosier, as in it will be less bad for Ukraine for all the reasons I've talked about. And I just don't easily see that Russia can have a good outlook here. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I think Jason Grace is being disingenuous about what I have said and how I'm saying it. And in fact, I spoke to Greg, and he said, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're on the same page there. We look at things differently. You look at the big picture. I look at the things on the ground, the small, this micro versus macro. And that's a great thing. You put both of these together and you have hopefully an accurate picture of what's going on. You just look at one and you'll find it distorted. And I don't know if here Jason Grace is actually just pro-Russian, or I don't really know. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks for listening to my last 5 minutes of banging on. Take care. Speak soon.